Hello YouTube, Luigi here. Tonight I'm going to try something fairly ambitious. It may even be beyond me. We'll see how well I do. I'm going to try to draw some direct and indirect corollaries between the movie Avatar and the Urantia book. Now some of these you're going to say, boy, that's a real reach. And yeah, some of them are only obliquely referential one to the other, and some are pretty darn direct and even uncanny in that regard. So I'm aware of that going into this. Let me tell you what this is not going to be. This is not going to be a highly slick, super polished, cool production. I don't have that great editing capabilities here. I'm going to do my best. Okay, so just lower your expectations right out of the box here. When I have to read from the text of the Urantia book, I will try not to sound like someone who's reading text. The truth is I do better when I'm just ad-libbing and winging it off the cuff. But there are some things I will have to read, so bear with me there. Also, and I hope this does not sound exclusionary, I'm not going to take the time to attenuate what comes out of the Urantia book for a general mass audience. This is more geared for readers of the Urantia book. Otherwise, I could spend 2.5 hours talking about the School of the Planetary Prince, or 2.5 hours talking about Adam and Eve and their mission, and this will just get bogged down into a 10-hour video. I don't want to do that, but what I do want to do, it is my ardent hope that those non-readers who, if they make it through the video, I'm hoping to stimulate their curiosity to where they will, on their own, want to learn more about the Urantia book. Okay, let's go to our first slide. Early on in the movie, Jake makes an interesting statement. He says, "I became a Marine for the hardship, to be hammered on the anvil of life. Told myself that I could pass any test a man can pass. All I ever wanted was a single thing worth living for. I'm sorry, worth fighting for. I'm going to do this in one take. I'm not going to go back and edit out my mistakes. All I ever wanted was a single thing worth fighting for." Now, what's interesting about this quote is, I became a Marine for the hardship, to be hammered on the anvil of life. Urantia readers well know this metaphor, and most of them think it appears once in the book, but the truth is, it appears twice. It appears in paper 9, where it says, "The universe of your origin is being forged out between the anvil of justice and the hammer of suffering. But those who wield the hammer are the children of mercy, the spirit offspring of the infinite spirit." And then again in paper 65, Urantia civilization was literally forged out between the anvil of necessity and the hammers of fear. So that's perhaps one of the more oblique references, but it's a reference nonetheless. Our next slide pictures Pandora. This is Pandora. And you can see Pandora is really not a planet. It is a moon orbiting around a huge, giant, blue, gaseous planet, very, very much like our Jupiter, except it's blue. It even has the giant blue spot, which on Jupiter is the giant red spot, that huge cyclonic storm that never seems to run out of steam. So, Pandora is an inhabited moon, not a planet. Reading from paper 49 in the Urantia book, not all planets are suited to harbor mortal life. Small ones, having a high rate of axial revolution, are wholly unsuitable for life inhabitants. In several of the physical systems of Satania, the planets revolving around the central sun are too large for habitation, their great masses occasioning oppressive gravity. Many of these enormous spheres have satellites, sometimes half a dozen or more, and these moons are often in size very near that of Urantia, so that they are almost ideal for habitation. So the Urantia book is telling us that yes, on occasion, a suitably sized moon can become an inhabited world. Here we see Jake wearing his exopack because of the toxic atmosphere outside in Pandora. Wikipedia, yeah, Wikipedia gets on board for this. Wikipedia tells us that Pandora's atmosphere is a mix of nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, xenon, ammonia, methane, and hydrogen sulfide. Humans cannot breathe this, so they wear exopacks when outside their buildings or vehicles. Now, what does the Urantia book have to say about this? It tells us that just because a planet doesn't have a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere like Earth does not mean it cannot be populated with humanoids of a different breathing type. I'm reading now from paper 49. Beings such as the Urantia races are classified as mid-breathers. You, meaning we, represent the average or typical breathing order of mortal existence. If intelligent creatures should exist on a planet with an atmosphere similar to that of your nearby neighbor Venus, they would belong to the super breather group, while those inhabiting a planet with an atmosphere as thin as that of your outer neighbor, Mars, would be denominated sub-breathers. Next slide. Here Jake sees his avatar for the first time. The avatar is behind him, floating around in its canister with its amniotic fluid, or scientific equivalent, and you can see the umbilical cord here. Now, from a book called The Science of Avatar by Stephen Baxter, I'm reading this. Jake tells us that the avatars are grown using a mixture of human and native DNA. A driver's avatar is derived from his own DNA, or in Jake's case, his identical twin brother. This is necessary to facilitate the synchronizing of the nervous systems between the avatar and driver, and that makes the psionic link possible. Now, early on, I've got a lot to read here, but I'm just going to wing it. Early on in the days of our planetary prince, he brought with him a staff of 100 ascendant citizens on Jerusalem. They had no bodies. They came here, but the life carriers had to fabricate bodies for them, because this was to be the corporeal staff. And corpus in Latin means body. Hic est enim corpus meum. This is my body. So the life carriers extract what the book calls life plasm. We would call it DNA today. From 100 native Urantia aborigines, the very best of the andonic stock on the planet, 50 men and 50 women, and they clone the 100 corporeal members of the prince's staff. So had cloning been in our lexicon back in 1934 when the Urantia papers were compiled, I'm sure the authors would have used it, because that's what was going on. Next slide. You see, I could spend 2 hours on that alone. Here's a picture of the link. This is the torpedo-shaped thing into which the humans get into. It opens with a hinged coffin-like lid, and then they're slid through this magnetron into this device where their consciousness is transported through a neural network into the neural network of the waiting avatar. Now, this reminds me of Transport Seraphim. The shape of it and what happens, the transportation of consciousness from one body to another. That's not literal here, but it's nonetheless reminds me of it. So I'm going to read what happened. This is going to be long, but I think it's fascinating. From paper 39. When celestial beings are to be in Seraphim for transfer from one world to another, they are brought to the headquarters of the sphere, and after due registry are inducted into the transit sleep. Excuse me. Meantime, the transport seraphim moves into a horizontal position, just like the link, immediately above the universe energy pole of the planet. While the energy shields are open, remember this opens like a casket, the sleeping personality is skillfully deposited by the officiating seraphic assistants, directly on top of the transport angel. Then both the upper and lower panels of the shields are carefully closed and adjusted. And now, under the influence of the transformers and the transmitters, a certain strange metamorphosis begins as the seraphim is made ready to swing into the energy circuits of the universe. To outward appearance, the seraphim grows pointed at both extremities and becomes so enshrouded in a queer light of amber hue that very soon it is impossible to distinguish the seraphim personality. When all is in readiness for departure, the chief of transport makes the proper inspection of the carriage of life, carries out routine tests to ascertain whether or not the angel is properly encircuited, and then announces that the traveler is properly enseraphimed, that the energies are adjusted, that the angel is insulated, and that everything is in readiness for the departing flesh. The mechanical controllers next take their positions. By this time, the transport seraphim has become an almost transparent, vibrating, torpedo-shaped outline of glistening luminosity. Now the transport dispatcher of the realm summons the auxiliary batteries of living energy transmitters, usually 1,000 in number, as he announces the destination of the transport, reaches out and touches the near point of the seraphic carriage, which shoots forward with lightning-like speed, leaving a trail of celestial luminosity as far as the planetary atmospheric investment extends. In less than 10 minutes, the marvelous spectacle will be lost to even reinforced seraphic vision. Wow, that was worth reading. Here's a picture I got off the internet of allegedly, supposedly, someone taking a picture of a seraphic transport. I don't believe this for a minute, but I'm showing it to you anyway. Because if it came from the internet, you know it's got to be true. Next slide. Here we find the evil Colonel Quaritch lifting weights. And as he's lifting these weights, he says, with that low, gravelly, He-Man, G.I. Joe voice of his, he says, this low gravity will make you soft. You get soft, Pandora will shit you out dead with zero warning. This is important because it's telling us Pandora has a low gravitational field. And when we saw the size of the moon Pandora relative to the huge gaseous planet behind it, that's exactly what we would expect. I mean, our own moon has a gravitational field 1/6 of that of our Earth. So relative to low gravity inhabited worlds, paper 49 of the Urantia book says, the various planetary types of mortals vary in height, the average of Nebadon being a trifle under 7 feet. Some of the larger worlds are peopled with beings who are only about 2.5 feet in height, because the gravity's heavy, obviously. Mortal stature ranges from here, meaning the 2.5 feet, on up through the average heights, meaning like our world, on the average size planets to around 10 feet on the smaller inhabited spheres. 10 feet tall, the humanoids get on the smaller spheres. And my guess is, in terms of relative scale to the humans, that the Na'vi on Pandora are about 11 feet tall. So this is one of those direct references where the low gravity of the planet yields taller humanoids. Here they are. I wanted everyone to see this picture because Sute, the chief warrior, is almost a full head taller than Jake. And Jake is no shrimp himself, but Sute was a big guy. Next picture. Not only were the people tall, but the low gravity also allowed local botany and the trees to attain incredible heights. Again, a function of the gravity of that particular sphere. Now, here's a picture of Grace Augustine. Here she is in the middle, Sigourney Weaver, of her school. Here's Natiri, and one can only guess this is Natiri's dead sister, Swana, that she's got her hands around. Augustine set up this school. Now here we have a supposedly superior people on a planet trying to elevate the natives. And certainly Dr. Augustine's intentions were benign that way, not necessarily the corporate mining interests of the pigs who were raping the planet, but certainly Dr. Augustine's interests were benign. And what we're told about the history of our planet is both the planetary prince and Adam and Eve the Planetary Prince set up a school and the corporeal staff, all 100 of them, staffed this school, and they taught the more intelligent tribes, neighboring tribes around this center, the arts of civilization. They taught them animal husbandry, how to make butter, how to make cheese, how to make yogurt, how to do weaving. They exposed them to the wheel. They taught them how to kindle fire at will. But man was terribly afraid of fire. They tried to teach them to burn their refuse, but they refused because of their terror of fire. So they tried to teach them to burn it. They tried to get them to bathe. But in those days, they only bathed once a year. So the school made it bathing a part of a weekly religious devotion just to get them to do it. But basically, the school of the Planetary Prince was taught the earliest human beings, the earliest rudiments of civilization. 350,000 years later, let's see, 300,000, 450,000 years later, when Adam and Eve were here, they set up schools that tried to continue the same things. Both failed because our Planetary Prince went into default when he joined the Lucifer Rebellion, and we all know Adam and Eve went into default when Eve took a bite of that fairy tale apple, right? Right. Okay, so that's the schools relative to what Grace Augustine was doing. Now, what is this picture telling us? This is a general comment on the blue race. We had a blue race on our planet. We had the 6 Sangic colored races, which were the first 6 colors of the spectrum, of the light spectrum: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo. They stopped there. Violet, the 7th color of the spectrum. The violet race would only appear on Earth when Adam and Eve did about 38,000 years ago. But I just have one paragraph here to read about the blue race. On our planet, the blue men were a great people. They early invented the spear and subsequently worked out the rudiments of many of the arts of modern civilization. The blue man had the brain power of the red man, associated with the soul and sentiment of the yellow man. The Adamic descendants preferred them to all of the later persisting colored races. What does that mean? It means the children of Adam and Eve were more physically attracted to the blue men, which means the blue man got more of the violet genetic upgrade than the other races. The Adamic descendants preferred them to all of the later persistent color races. And yet all races, to some measure, some more than others, got part of the Adamic blood. That's the blue race on our planet. They, by the way, invaded Western Europe. They were the Neanderthals who conquered the Cro-Magnons and started civilization there. Here we see Natiri about to kill Jake with a what? A bow and arrow. Wow. The book tells us that the red races migrated to Eastern Asia, but were driven off the continent by the yellow races. The yellow races were a stronger people because they didn't fight among themselves like the red man did. The red man engaged in internecine wars which very much weakened them, and the yellow man had no trouble driving the red man off the continent, over the Bering Strait land bridge, and into North America. Now, the last great migration of the red man into North America took place 80,000 years ago. The last sinking of the Bering Strait land bridge was 50,000 years ago. So if the red man left the continent of Asia 80,000 years ago, I want to read this to you. It says, with the completion of the conquest of Eastern Asia, the ancient military estate gradually disintegrated. They're talking about the yellow race here. Past wars were forgotten. Of the epic struggle with the red race, there persisted only the hazy tradition of an ancient contest with the archer peoples. This means that the red man was using the bow and arrow as long as 80,000 years ago. And I think that's a very interesting little factoid of history. Okay, next picture. The Na'vi lived in home tree. They lived in a tree. What does the Urantia book have to say about our ancient relatives being tree dwellers? It said from paper 49, even on Urantia there was a long age during which primitive man preserved himself and advanced his primitive civilization by living for the most part in the treetops, as did his earlier arboreal ancestors. Now, part of living in the tree was safety at night. It wasn't until man could kindle fire at will and keep it going throughout the night, because all wild animals are afraid of fire, that he finally got out of his tree and started to sleep on the ground. And even then, there were fire watchers, and they took turns, designated people who stayed up all night and made darn sure that fire never went out. Next picture. Here we see Jake riding on his ikran. I love it when the Tiri says, ikran is not horse. He's riding on his ikran. What does the Urantia book tell us about our forebears who might have flown around on giant flying animals? This is from paper 66. It was in these days that the carrier pigeons were first used, being taken on long journeys for the purpose of sending messages or calls for help. Bond's group were successful in training the great Pandors as passenger birds, but they became extinct more than 30,000 years ago. And Adam and Eve rode the Pandors. The third day, this is talking about Adam and Eve's third day in the garden, the third day was devoted to an inspection of the garden. From the large passenger birds, the Pandors, Adam and Eve looked down upon the vast stretches of the garden while being carried through the air over this, the most beautiful spot on earth. So this fits if Adam and Eve arrived 38,000 years ago, and the previous paragraph I read said the Pandors became extinct more than 30,000 years ago. That certainly fits. Next picture. The Na'vi had two sacred trees, the tree of voices and the tree of souls. And this was sort of the focus of their monotheism, okay? And these were sacred sites, and they meant a lot to them. And what does the Urantia tell us about our tree of life? From paper 73, it says, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil may have been a figure of speech, a symbolic designation covering a multitude of human experiences, but the tree of life was not a myth. It was real and for a long time present on Urantia. Now, when the corporeal staff of the prince came down to Urantia, came down to Earth, the constellation father sent a shrub of Urantia, which sustained them because they were plugged into the universe circuits, as long as they remained faithful to the ordained divine plan for evolving inhabited worlds, which they didn't. But as long as they partook of this tree of life, they would be undying. Not only them, the staff, but their 100 human counterparts who contributed their DNA. This sustained them for over 300,000 years, until the rebellion broke out when the loyalists, Van and the mighty loyal Midwayers, gained possession of the Tree of Life, took it to their highland safe ground, where they were sustained by it for 150,000 years until Adam and Eve came. Adam and Eve were sustained by the Tree of Life. So the Tree of Life was a real thing, and I'm making this loose analogy to our Tree of Life on our world, to the Tree of Souls and the Tree of Voices on Pandora. Now, here's Taruk. Taruk. Boy, what did Natiri tell Jake about Taruk? Taruk has only made 5 appearances on Pandora since the beginnings of the first songs. That's how she described it. 5 appearances. He always shows up at a time of great distress, and he unites the clans. He has this harmonizing and unifying influence on the world. Now, the 5 previous appearances of Taruk remind me very strongly of the 5 epical revelations on our world. The first one being the school of the Planetary Prince, the second one being the Adam and Eve, the third one being the incarnation of Melchizedek, 2000 BC, the fourth one being the life of Christ, and the 5th epical revelation being the Urantia book itself. I'm going to read one paragraph here from paper 49. As a result of the ministry of all the successive orders of divine sonship, these periodic visitations, the inhabited worlds and their advancing races begin to approach the apex of planetary evolution. Such worlds now become ripe for the culminating mission, the arrival of the Trinity Teacher Sons. This epoch of the Teacher Sons is the vestibule to the final planetary age, evolutionary utopia, the age of light and life. Now, we're a long way away from that, but the point is we're on an evolutionary path. And evolution is slow. It may be slow, but it is inexorable. It cannot be stopped. The evil that we see in the world around us will not have its way forever. Don't lose faith, people. Wow, what's this? This is Jake, about to be reborn, reincarnated, redeposited from his paraplegic body into his avatar body. And what does this tell us about our own resurrection? What does the book tell us about our own resurrection? We have a similar thing that happens to us after death in the resurrection halls of the first mansion world, where 2 constitutive components that make up who we are recombined and reassembled into this new body which is waiting for us. And these 2 components are the personality, which is held in trust by our guardian seraphim, along with our identity, which is held in trust by our indwelling father fragment, the thought adjuster, the mystery monitor. It has some names. I really like father fragment because thought adjuster sounds so Machiavellian, so Orwellian rather. So our guardian seraphim plus our mystery monitor, our indwelling father fragment, reassemble us by combining personality plus identity. And that will be who we are when we awaken in glory on the first mansion world of on the first resurrection halls of Mansonia number 1. All right, everybody. That's a quick race through the 3-hour movie Avatar and the 2,000-page book, the Urantia book. God bless you. I love you all. Hope it gave you stuff to think about. I hope I opened your eyes to some things that you might not have been aware of. And for those who don't know anything about the Urantia book, I hope I stimulated some interest. Okay, God bless you. I love you all. Take good care.